How's it going, guys? Ethan Page here. Welcome back to the channel. Today's episode is going to be the first in a series of videos that I'm going to do about self bows. So what do I know about self bows? Honestly, if I'm being totally honest, not a whole lot. I've made bows, bad ones, good ones, whatever, and dabbled in bow making for nearly 15 years. I've broken a ton of bows and I've made some that worked okay, but I've been more serious about it here in the past few years or so, and I've learned a lot in taking it more seriously and learned some lessons that I think can help you guys avoid some of the heartaches that I've experienced. Not that some growing pains are okay, which they are, and they're important, but if I can help you avoid blowing up as many bows as I have, or putting a ton of hard work into a bow just to have it fail because of something that you could have avoided, then I'm gonna help you guys and share that with you. So this first video is going to be about what I personally think is maybe the most important thing to understand before you start getting into bow making, or even if you're into it already, is proper design. Understanding the relationship between certain bow woods and the design that you need to use for those specific bow woods. For example, everybody's heard of Osage orange, or as the Indians called it, Bodark. It is truly probably one of the best bow woods out there. A lot of people truly believe, and maybe it is true, that the Osage is king. But I will object to that in the sense that I think you can make just as good of a bow with proper design out of more inferior, or what in the bow world is called second string bow woods. You can make a bow that's just as effective, just as deadly for hunting, and just as accurate as you can with Osage. Osage is more forgiving. You can use Osage and make more bow designs that tailor a little bit more to what you want them to do. And because Osage is so hard and dense and flexible, good under compression and tension, it can handle some screw ups. It can handle some knots and some bad spots and some squirreliness in the wood. And it can handle some flaws of your own as a bowyer and still make a perfectly acceptable bow. But Osage orange is also not accessible to everybody without paying a lot of money for a stave to be sent to you, unless you can find a local farmer maybe that has a hedge on their property that you can go cut. That's possible, something to look into. But in order to make a good bow from hedge or Osage orange or Bodark, that stave has to season for a long time. I've heard of some people seasoning for years, like 5 years, that they'll season a bow stave before they'll consider using it. Now that's out of a lot of different woods, not just Osage orange. But I believe that you can make just as good of a bow, just as effective, just as deadly and accurate, with proper design out of second string woods. So let's talk a little bit about good bow design and why efficient good bow design is important. So to really kind of synopsize everything, if you make a bow long enough, if you make a bow, let's say 70 inches long and the limbs 2 inches wide, you can avoid a lot of problems. You can have worse tiller, or strain the wood a little bit too much while you're tillering it, or whatever, and still end up with a good shootable bow, because the limbs are wider, the bow is longer, there's more limb material. That's the basic consensus of it. There's more limb material to take the strain and the workload that you're imparting on that bow. But a 70-inch long 2-inch wide bow is going to be also very sluggish. It's not going to be the greatest shooting bow. Not going to be super duper effective. Usable, deadly, probably accurate, all that, but there's better options. So, but just by keeping in mind the fact that if a bow is wide enough, regardless of the wood, if you make a bow wide enough and long enough, especially if you put a backing on it, but I'm just talking about self bows, which self bows means just it's supporting itself. There is no backing. Then you can make bows that are super effective that have no backing on them, as long as you're paying attention to the design. So let's talk about some of the designs here that I've made. Yes, these are some of my better bows. They're not great by any means. I'm no expert, but they're pretty effective, pretty shootable bows. This one you guys have seen a lot in my videos recently. This is the, as of right now, this is my hunting bow. This is the bow that I'm going to be using for turkey season here a little over a week from now in Missouri. This is my Howard Hill style hickory longbow. This bow is 68 inches long and pulls about 50 pounds. And the design of this bow, as you know, is typical of hill style bows. You know, a built-up riser, straight grip, and this one, the fades are a little bit shorter than would be typical of a hill style bow, but this is the way I chose to do my fades. As far as fades are concerned, let's go ahead and talk about that with your bow fades. The safer option is to have fades that are a little bit, and when I say fades, you see how that tapers down out of there, out of the handle fade. If you push that fade a little bit further out and it'll make it a little more gradual, that is safer, because if you're not careful, you can create a weak point right here if you make your fades too steep, or your tapers and fades into your handle too steep. This is about right on the line. But it's also a fine line. You don't want your handle to fade all the way out here. You know, if you draw a straight line all the way out here, because then look at all that working limb section you've taken away. You've taken away several inches of working limb that can help take some stress and workload off the limbs. So even the fades in your handle, it's kind of a song and dance. But with this design, to stay true to more to a traditional hill style bow, self bow, this is what I chose to do. As you can see, this bow did take a little bit of string follow, or set, as limb set is another name for it, which just means that when you unstring it, the limbs are still bent like it's strung. But this also is no more string follow than is typical of a traditional self hill style bow that it has string follow. Many of them have string follow. Companies like Northern Mist, Steve Charay makes his Shelton ASL or hill style bow, and it has string follow. So this is not that bad. This is perfectly acceptable in my world as far as I'm concerned for having string follow or set in your limbs. But the reason that happened probably is because of the design. I was going for a specific design in this bow, and that's what I had to work with. This was a hickory board. I chose to use processed lumber to make this bow, and I've so far not regretted that decision in the least. But in doing so, proper board selection was critical. I have this bow. This is edge grain right here, as you can see. This is the edge grain of the wood. There's no single growth ring making the back of this bow. This is all an edge grain that runs from this tip to this tip with no runoff. As described in Meadowlark Adventure Gear, great channel for you guys to go check out how he makes his bows. A great description for a board bow is that in board selection, you need to be able to look at that grain, the face grain across that board, and imagine it like an onion. If you grab a piece of that grain and peel it like an onion, would that peel from one end of the bow to the other? That's what this one does. This is a 1 in the entire store basically where I went to buy this. This was the only usable piece of wood in that whole store of the hickory selection. But edge grain like that is not as strong in tension and compression as this would have been if it was made from an actual tree stave, where it has you know, growth rings running linearly through the limbs. They can take more strain and compression. So this is really very, very good for the material that I used and the way that it's oriented. So, but these limbs also taper to the tips starting all the way back here at the fades. If I'd left these limbs a little bit wider toward the middle of the bow, would not probably have taken as much set because there would have been more limb material to take the stress. But that's not what I wanted. I wanted a hill style bow, and that's what I made. But with the minimal set that it took, I'm perfectly okay with that. This is another bow you guys have seen in my videos. This is my more primitive Eastern Woodland style bow. And where I messed up on this bow, as you can see, it took a little bit more string follow, a little over 2 inches. Where I screwed up on this bow was from the beginning. I did attempt to fire harden this bow, but the wood I did not let dry long enough. I harvested this in the warm months, let it dry for a while, and then started shaping it and fire hardening it. Well, I'd say the fire hardening is probably the only thing that overall saved this bow. What happened? Here's a perfect example. Because of how shallow I made this handle, and because this is a 68-inch long bow, there's plenty of working limb here. I should have made these fades more gradual. I should have had these fades, they should have had no dip in them. These fades should have gradually come all the way out, probably a couple more inches than they do. And left this middle section a little bit more rigid, because what happened is I ended up with too much flex in because of bad tiller. I ended up with too much flex in my fades, and it stressed my fades, and that's where they took most of their set from. The limbs in and of themselves are not that bad, but it took the set from the fades. It's hard to fix. I fixed it a little bit and got some set back out of it, but that could have been avoided with better design. I should not have had that quickly fade into the handle like that. That steep. That really screwed this bow. Other than that, I could live with the amount of set that the limbs took. Like I said, the limbs are not that bad. But I screwed up and strained the wood in these fades. And that makes this bow a little bit more sluggish, a little bit more hand shockish. I should have, as far as the width, I should have made this a touch wider. I was, in keeping with Eastern Woodland style, I was trying to be under 1.5 inches, but with having a handle and everything else and then a taper into the handle. Eastern Woodland style bows are a rectangular cross section, and they're the same width, thickness, bend through the handle, everything. The handle would be like grabbing the middle of this limb, and that runs all the way through their bows, except for about the last 8 to 10 inches it fades into the nocks. That's what I should have done with this bow, but I had poor design. And so what happened is, because these limbs are too narrow, too thick, because I was trying to keep weight up, screwed up the tiller, didn't have enough material out of these limbs quick enough before I strained the fades, and also the tips got left a little bit fat too. But there is symmetrical bend through this bow, which means that when this bow's strung, it looks like you took a section out of a circle. It's just an even arc. And I was able to salvage the bow ultimately, but good design would have prevented a lot of the mistakes I made on this bow. No arrow shelf would have been better for this bow because of how narrow it already is. Much, much more gradual fade into the handle would have kept probably from taking any set from the fades, but it's just too sharp. It's too much, too quick, and it created a weak spot. And then making these limbs a touch wider. These are about 1 3/8 inches wide. I should have had them at least 1.5 inches, and this bow would have been near perfect, but still a good bow. This bow I recently made, this design is, in my opinion, and if you read the Traditional Bowyer's Bible, a great resource. I believe it was either Ron Hardcastle or Paul Comstock, the section in the Traditional Bowyer's Bible talking about using white wood to make bows and the importance of good design whenever you're making white wood bows. This is his go-to style bow, and this is the most forgiving and still very efficient, fast and accurate style of bow that somebody could make out of a white wood. This is a hackberry bow. This one was an American elm. This is hackberry, great bow wood. This, and again, is probably the design I would suggest to all of you guys to start with. What is consistent in the design here, this is a 66-inch long bow, so it's 2 inches shorter than these other bows even. And I had to do that because the stave dictated that I had needed to make a longer bow out of it, because I only had so much length to work with in the stave, and it had a knot in the middle part of it. If I wanted to make this a 68-inch long bow, this knot would have been over here. It wouldn't have worked. I had to shorten the bow, put the knot in the middle of the handle, and it worked just fine. I did have to build up the handle section a little bit, but that's not that big of a deal. But what is consistent in this design, and any decent, second string wood like hickory, elm, hackberry, ash, oak, and what makes these bows a lot more effective and a lot safer, more forgiving to make and shoot, you can make some mistakes. These limbs are just over 1.5 inches wide. These are 1 5/8 wide limbs. They are 1 5/8 all the way out to only about 9-ish inches, about 9 inches from the tips before they start tapering into these finer tips. See how fine these tips are? These are only about 1/2 inch wide. So it keeps material out of your tips, which makes them more snappy. They're quicker in returning to their position of rest after the shot. Gonna give you more speed. Look how much more gradual the fade is into the fade outs into the handle are. Much more gradual. The working, this handle is non-working. It stops, the limbs stop bending about 1 inch in front of where this handle riser that I glued, a piece that I glued on here, this block, about 1 inch in front of it's where the working part stops. I have these limbs working all the way up to about right there. So because these limbs are longer, that's still 66-inch long bow, they're wider, they have plenty of working length, the fades are very gradual, much more gradual. There's no arrow shelf cut into this, it's tapered to the middle with a little swell for comfort, and then you shoot off of the knuckles. Right here you see I have the arrow, then you shoot it right off your knuckles. Look how much set this bow took. None. This is a 50-pound hackberry bow. It is fast, it is accurate, the limbs are not too thick and beefy, but because of good design, this bow is going to be a great hunting bow. This is similar of a lot of designs that people would call, like a survival bow, 60 some odd inches long, 2 inches wide. There's nothing, quick thrown together, chintzy or basic about this bow. This is a serious hunting weapon. And even with a little bit more frills than would have been typical of a lot of Native American bows in the eastern woodlands. But it's going to shoot a little bit faster, it's going to be more forgiving, and you're going to be able to be a little bit more novice in your tillering abilities and still produce a good bow. This design is what I encourage all of you guys to get good at. Minimum 1.5 inch wide limbs, running at least 2/3 of the way through the limb, and the last 10 inches or so, start tapering to finer nocks, about 1/2 inch to 5/8 nocks. And no cutouts for arrow shelves or anything like that. Just bring it into, this is just a basic flat bow is what this would be called. This is a hackberry flat bow. and you know, a nice little handle to hold on to. If this knot swell wasn't in here, oh, it'd be about 1.75 inches, something like that probably, but or 1.5 inches, somewhere along those lines. But this bow is sweet to shoot. Not a lot of hand shock, anything like that. And it's made out of a hackberry tree, a tree that's pretty accessible in the United States, especially in the eastern woodlands. So study good design, study what it means whenever you're stressing the limbs and overstressing the limbs, which we'll get more into one of these days when we talk about tiller. But if you make the right design for the bow that you want, make those limbs longer, a little bit wider, more gradual fade outs in your handles, you can really screw up a lot more and have a lot more room for error and still produce a fine hunting weapon if you are careful with the design. So thanks for watching this video, guys. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Let's get the channel out there so we can all learn together. Get outside, hey guys, and shoot straight and start working on your own bow projects, and keep yourselves busy. And like I said, if you guys want to pick up the Traditional Bowyer's Bible or Clay Hayes' book that he has, the Bowyer's Handbook, I believe it's called, great resources. So anyway, guys, I'll catch you all next time.